The next speaker, Al Palmer, that's in your agenda there, was unable to make it, and so Robert Fisher is going to say a few words. Any of you that were at the display on Monday, Robert spoke a bit there. He is a accountant turned prospector, which is a bit of a different twist. And actually, Robert and I grew up in the same town, and we have talked more here today and yesterday and the day before than we've ever talked before. And it's not because we don't like each other. It's just that he grew up a little different time than I did. But anyway, he's got a great story to tell, and help me welcome Robert to the mic.
The first thing I want to say about technology is evolutionary, not revolutionary. Everything that we do in technology, what I've seen is it develops on, something else. Is it automatically? What I've done in this display is I love amateur photography, so what I did is when I present this, typically there's not all geologists and not all mineral people in the room, so I've interspersed the presentation with some photographs that I took as well. And so anyway, the story behind this project is we commercialized this application in 2007. And what we needed to market it was a case study. And we would go to clients and we'd say, can we publish the results of what we do? And they would say, oh, sure, not a problem. Well, once we gave them the results and they saw what we could do, all of a sudden they would say, remember that confidentiality agreement you signed? And so we worked for 4 years. We did probably 60 client cases, and we had 2 people that were willing to share the results with anybody else. And when you see the power of this technology, you will understand why. And so anyway, I call it the dawning of a new day with molecular resonance coupling. The technology, again, I'm saying is evolutionary. There's nuclear magnetic resonance, and originally discovered in 1986. The observation, and these are wonderful scientific words, it basically really means that you can study something by the energy that it gives off. The base research led to the development of an MRI imaging that we all accept as a useful medical tool. My partner started researching the uses of the NMR technology in 1995, and in 2007, after 27 months of field tests, was ready to use it in the geology field. Between his major in physics and mine in mathematics, we're able to develop a physics solution to a geological search for minerals. And again, what I'm saying is we now are working in New Brunswick. For the people that aren't aware, New Brunswick is one of our maritime provinces. Our actual deposit is approximately 4 miles from the Bay of Fundy on Canada's east coast. We conducted blind tests. We did everything scientifically possible to prove the technology before we ever released it into the market, simply because we could not afford a powerful technology to be rejected if, in fact, there was something that we could have discovered in our pilot testing before we released it. And we worked and worked and worked on that process. This is a map of our claims in New Brunswick. And if you go from the southwest at the bottom to the northeast at the top, you're looking at somewhere around 9.5 miles. The story behind this project is there was a prospector out there tramping the bush, and he found 2 occurrences of copper on surface that were about 4.5 miles apart. We met him at a mining show, and what intrigued me was, I wonder if they're joined. Well, only our technology that can literally see through the earth would be able to determine that. And if you picture these 2 points, Mother Nature doesn't do anything in straight lines. And so if you have 1 point here and you have a point here, well, the only way you can prove it is drill. And literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, and nobody's going to do that with 2 occurrences. What we did is we took our satellite-based technology and plotted and said, I wonder where the copper is. And with our technology, it's a little bit like a DNA of matching molecules. So what we did is we chose 2 actual copper minerals, one of which was native or pure copper, and the other one was malachite. Oh. My thumbs must be too big for this device. Anyway, if you look, you'll see a red boundary here, red rectangle. How do I stop it? It wants to keep, it has a mind of its own. Anyway, you'll see the red boundary, and what that is was our satellite data test area. What you will see in here was the satellite is telling us that there's native copper underground. There's another area down here, and not only was there native copper, there also is gold. And 2 weeks from, or on June 8th, we're actually taking a drill rig in here and we're going to drill it. And what we did a year ago is we picked a point here and we actually took a track hoe in and started trenching. There is absolutely no copper on surface. I had 2 geologists that had a combined approximately 80 years of experience, and they thought I was absolutely crazy. We had taken the track hoe. There's a very steep slope here, and so we'd taken the track hoe and we took out about 29, 30 truckloads of material to dig down. I arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on my flight, and I went out there and he goes, we haven't found any bedrock yet. Should we keep digging? Well, I made the decision that says, well, how long you guys plan on working? And he said, well, probably 5:36. And I said, well, keep digging and you can let me know. I think it was 4 more scoops with the track hoe and we hit bedrock. In that bedrock, there was copper. It was under approximately 18 feet of glacial till that we were looking through to see this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drill 2 test holes in here. One of about 150 meters, so approximately 500 feet. And then we're also going to do a deep hole and approximately 1,000 feet. We're going to put our results on the website of that. This is the most southerly claim. This is the northerly claim. And what we're doing now is searching for two materials. The black spots are the native copper. The red lines, ignoring the red boundary, right, is malachite. And what you'll see is the very first target we trenched was right here. There was an intersection of native copper along with the malachite. In New Brunswick, there's the Irving family that owns approximately, well, I'm going to say owns New Brunswick, but maybe that's a little overstatement. But they have about 48 businesses. And what happened is, if you live in New Brunswick, you either don't like the Irvings or you really like them because you work for them and they provide jobs. Well, I've had so much fun with my taxi drivers because the taxi drivers basically don't like the Irvings. That's what I found out. So I jump in the cab and I say, yeah, I see the Irvings are doing some work here. Gee, they're building this, or, right? They are going to be the beneficiary, actually, of the Energy East pipeline that was talked about earlier. They have a refinery in St. John, and we're about 35 miles from St. John, so let's call it their neighbors. But Irvings also have a large forestry operation. Well, we love the Irvings because what they do is they give us roads and they give us access. And anyway, this here was one of their forestry roads. And you can see this malachite trend going right along the road. In turn, here is road system. This one here is actually a provincial highway that goes right through our claims. This copper is literally on the surface of the bedrock that is, 1.5 to the 18 feet that we trenched. Anyway, if the Caterpillar operator, when he was building this forestry road, if he would have got down off of his Caterpillar, he would have seen there was copper occurrences where literally his scraper blade had caught the rock and exposed. I had the prospector go out there once we had this satellite data, and he picked up 5 occurrences of copper along this road. Again, what we did is we trenched them all to find the grades that we're interested in, and that was really the starting point of all of our work. I have the samples of the rock in our booth of the copper that's come out of here. But as the project evolved, and maybe it was a good thing that I was an accountant and not a geologist because I didn't go into it with any preconceived notions. I should say that as an accountant, what I really did is I had a technology practice all my life. I actually spent 38 years setting up computer systems, so this technology and being an accountant really aren't as far back as we like to make a joke about it. But I always tell everybody, you want to put me in a square box, call me an accountant. Because my wife says, I wish you were a fireman. Because she said, well, then when people ask what you do, she said, I just say you're a fireman, and they don't ask any more questions. She said, right now, she said, I don't know how to answer the question, what does your husband do? Anyway, as we worked on this, one of the things we did, and you'll see the end of the satellite data here, we got so confident that it was picking up the data. What we did is we took this copper trend that's here, and we projected it, and we actually took a track hole in here. This is a clear-cut forestry area. It gave us great access. And what we did is we actually trenched there and found the actual native copper. We trenched here, found this native copper where it crosses the road. So in a way, what we did is in 2012, when we did the satellite data, is we've now discovered this copper mineralization. And in a way, it was like we could drive up to the copper in a half-ton truck. But remember, there's nothing on surface. So nobody believed us. So half of this project was to get the case study that I talked about, and the other half was, boy, I sure hope there's some economic copper there so we can make some money at it. And anyway, it was like we drove up to this deposit in a half-ton truck, and then what I did is I put the truck in reverse. I didn't look behind me. What I did is I looked in the rearview mirror, and I had to back up for 2 years to find the geological data that would support the occurrence of that copper at depth. And that's what we really did with the trenching. We did some limited drilling to prove it. Our drill program, where we're going to drill this, is about $250,000, so you don't make that decision lightly. And what we were really looking for was some geological data that would support what our satellite data was telling us. We didn't get it. There's been no confirmation. And what we found out when we went through this process, okay, geologists have theories of how copper is formed. This is the ocean front about 6 miles from our deposit. And you'll notice the slope on this, and it's a red sandstone. They call it a red bed. Well, there's a definition of red bed copper deposits. What we did is we followed this slope back, and we actually found the red bed sands underneath our satellite data. And that was one of those, aha, now we got support. Along comes the geologist and said, well, yeah, there could be copper in there, but there wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be economic. So reject that model, move on to the next one. You'll see here there's some solid bedrock at surface. Our satellite data trend, this is that forestry road I'm talking about. When we plotted our satellite data, the prospector put a stake in the middle of the road. Well, that sort of presents a problem when you got a track hoe and you're going to dig a hole in the ground. And so I flipped a coin to figure out whether we should move to the south side of the road or the north side of the road. Well, the south side won. And we started trenching. And right behind the track hoe here, it was all broken rock. And the track hoe operator was having a terrible time because this broken rock, it was 3-foot long chunks, and he'd go to scrape it. The bucket would bounce up over it, and he had a terrible time digging it out. So the geologist said, well, why don't you turn around and start in the bedrock and scrape backwards? Well, in the spring of 2013, that's exactly what I took the geologist's advice and followed it. The geologist was basically standing on the road in this area once we got the trench done, and what we did is we took a rock saw and we're cutting samples out of the bedrock. I wondered why myself, because there was no visible copper at all in this bedrock. But he had 40 years experience, I had 0. Let's go with that. Anyway, we had all these assays done. I argued with the geologist for about 3 weeks because the assays were going to be $1,800. I didn't really want to do them. There was no visible copper in it. And literally it could destroy the potential of this project. Anyway, I went ahead, got the assay results back. At the end of June, I'm talking to the prospector, and I'm ready to walk away. I don't know to this day, folks, whether the geologists, the two of them, were smart like fox, and what they wanted me to do was to walk away from the project, or truly they didn't understand what we were trying to do, and therefore they thought from a professional point of view was, let's do the report so the guy walks away and doesn't waste any more money. Anyway, basically, I fired the two geologists, and we went back in September. And the prospector went back and replotted all of our satellite data. And I got the most wonderful email in the end of July, and it was called Good News. There's our rotary drilling, some of our work. That was the rock that he found on surface. And if that geologist that was standing on the road where I was talking about, if he would have taken, he was literally standing in this area, if he would have taken 2 steps backwards, he would have tripped over the copper mineralization. Based on that, we went back and we did all of the additional trenching that I'm talking about. This was the location on that first location on the road. What we did is we ended up digging out the big boulders. We had the Traco operator separate the big boulders so we could examine, break them open, look at them. It had been a long time since I'd swung a sledgehammer, and it was actually great work for one of those out-of-shape accountants. And we spent literally 2013 and 2014 analyzing this deposit from a pure geological point of view. The reason I put this picture in is mining has a bad name in terms of environmentalism. Half of our land is owned by the government. The other half is privately owned. And the landowner shared with me that his wife would never ever see this waterfall that was on their land simply because of mobility issues. I went into the waterfall, I first saw it in July, and in the trees it was too dark to get a picture. And when I went back at the end of October, the leaves had come off the trees, and here was this waterfall. And I took a picture, I got it blown up, and I presented it to his wife at Christmas time, and they now hang that in their house. And so it's possible to combine good environmental stewardship with mining, and everybody wins. Here's some of the rocks, and the green that you see in it is the copper when it gets exposed to air. I mean, wonderful, wonderful samples, and actually different rock, each one of these samples, which is very encouraging because it's not just one type of rock carrying the copper, it's multiple. This sample here is we sliced a rock open with a diamond saw. That is the pure copper. Mother Nature has refined it for us, and it's sitting there. This piece of copper is approximately 2 inches long in the rock. My learning wasn't done with the geologists yet. The geologists now suggested that we use some magnetic processes to find and determine the rest of this deposit. I don't know why by that time, but I got a little skeptical, and I had to question the geologists. What I have since found out is there is 9 deposits of where they mine native copper in the whole world. And I was sitting in front of a group of 26 geologists, geophysicists, and the one geophysicist said, well, he said, I don't know why you're looking for native copper and malachite. He said 98% of the world's copper comes from a copper mineral called chalcopyrite. And his comment made me stop and think, well, why would that be? I mean, there's 9 native copper sites that are being mined. Well, what I found out was these native copper sites were either on surface or they were a byproduct of chalcopyrite. And again, that made me think some more. I mean, this was my audit training analysis that I went through to have my accounting degree. And I found out that there's no geophysical tool that exists today that can find native copper. We have that tool. And we have a very good competitive advantage of finding copper deposits in the world. What we have now done is, this is our first project. If the drilling confirms what we think is there, we have 4 more native copper deposits in Canada that we want to develop. There's one copper deposit, and it had the green copper in it. Originally discovered in the 1970s, the company has spent over $70 million in exploration and found nothing other than their green malachite that was exposed on surface. All of the geology tends to support that there will be native copper in that area. We're looking forward to working on that one. Little history here. This is a picture of Peggy's Cove, one of our top tourist spots on our east coast. But an interesting little sidelight. I think most people are aware of Swiss Air Flight 111 that went down. It was flying from New York to Europe, and there was a fire on board. They requested emergency landing in Halifax, but they were fully loaded with fuel, and so they went out over the ocean to dump their fuel. Well, this is where the plane crashed, and all the people on board were perished in it. They figure what happened is the smoke fire overtook the cockpit, and the pilots totally lost control. And literally the people of Peggy's Cove, I mean, just gave their hearts to the survivors. And there's a huge memorial on the rock in relation to that relationship. So I share that with you. I mean, here's the beauty of the tourist spot, but here's the tragedy approximately 4 miles offshore. Nothing to do with our copper, but an interesting sidelight when you're an amateur photographer. Yesterday, I had this sample of gold in my booth. It's a rock that literally fits in your hand. Some of the people here, I had them take a picture with it. I took this rock, another project we're working on, to a geology show, and I was asked what museum had I borrowed it from. This is very, very high-grade gold, which everybody says does not exist anymore. We found this gold under 4 feet of glacial till. One more project we plan on working on. Here is an illustration and a confirmation of our technology. When you look at these horizontal lines across, and they got nice colored boxes on them, what you can do over top of a gold deposit is you can take soil samples. The gold mineralization actually migrates to about 18 to 24 inches below the surface. If you take soil samples, you get them assayed, and there'll be an indication that there's gold down below. What you have is, here's your higher grade samples of gold. You can see them here in the pink and the yellow, right? What we did, and we did not know that our client had actually ran the soil sampling. He asked us to do the MRC test over top of this area. What we told him is he has a gold trend here, he has a gold trend here, he has this outside area of gold, and then there's an inner core. Now, the implication would be that this area also has gold in it, and the answer is no, it doesn't. These are literally fault fractures that have filled with gold. And what you will see is here's the soil samples basically to, let's call it the left and down from where the actual gold is. The reason for that is this deposit is located in the mountains of British Columbia, and the slope is from here down this way. And so as the gold mineralization migrated up in the soil was moving downslope. Imagine the implication if you drilled these targets. You might get lucky here and hit something, but you're going to miss, 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 and miss. That's what our technology does. What I'm really saying is if you embrace this technology, you can hold a rainbow in your hands. That's how powerful it is. Here's another description, and we're talking about power and energy and technology. On the Bay of Fundy, I don't know whether people are aware or not, it is the highest tides in the world. If you look at the water surface out here, at high tide, the water is up here. It's 48 feet of tidal water comes into that bay and leaves twice a day. It's 2 billion tons of water estimated, and you can imagine the power potential. Anyway, this is a tourist spot, and again, I don't work when I'm down there all the time. I become a tourist, drive around, get some of these pictures. But I'd also be remiss if I didn't showcase Saskatchewan a little bit, since I'm a Saskatchewan boy. Born, bred, stayed there. Saskatchewan is divided into 1/3. We have 1/3 prairie, which is your farming land in the south. We have the middle third, which is forest and water. And then what happened is your northern third is basically rocks and lakes. I think Michigan advertises that the fact they're a land of 10,000 lakes. Well, in Saskatchewan, there's 105,000 lakes in our northern province. And if you're ever interested in fishing, right, if for nothing else, take my business card and I can arrange a wonderful fishing trip for you. I don't own any fishing lodges, so I don't have any bias, but this is a waterfall in northern Saskatchewan. It's about 106 feet high and about 2/3 of a mile across. There's absolutely no access to this area other than by float plane, and I would say there's less than 100 people a year get the opportunity to fly in there. And when we're doing some mineral exploration, I had the opportunity to do that. I couldn't resist showing off this picture. That ends my presentation, and contact information there. And do we have time for questions, Sink?
Anybody have any questions for Robert? You know, one thing that you maybe didn't touch on too much is on the oil opportunities for your technology to find oil deposits. The other thing is about abandoned pipelines, some of that other stuff that's really interesting for what your satellite programming can do. Can you just touch bases on that quickly?
Thanks very much, Dave, for that question. I wanted to illustrate the case study that we're able to have to publish, so I never touched on any of the other things that we use the technology for. But in a lot of ways, what it is it's a molecular match. So really what happened is, if you want to find anything, give me a sample and we will find its match. We have used it in oil and gas. We proved the technology. I call it in the negative. The fellow was going to build or drill a gas well, and his target depth was 8,200 feet. And we ran the satellite over top of it, and we told the guy there was no gas there. I got to the point that I begged this fella not to drill. He blew $2.6 million and there was no gas there. And that was our proofing of oil and gas. But also what we found out, and what we do is we look for a competitive advantage to use the technology. And I got to assume that it is true in the United States. In Canada, what we did prior to 1982 is the gathering lines in oil fields were fiberglass pipe. There's no marker wires. You cannot find them. And there's this wonderful term in the pipeline business, and it's called as-built. And I kept hearing this as-built. Finally, I went and I said, well, what's as-built? Well, he said, the engineering diagrams, he said, they plan the pipe like this. That's the as planned. Well, what happened is they start digging the pipe into the ground. The guy hits a big boulder here and says, well, you know, the shortest distance would be right here. And so the pipeline plans are in the office, they're in the documentation, but it does not represent the as-built. And anyway, what we found out is we could match to this fiberglass pipe. And we could see the pipe underground, and it was so accurate. What we did is we took 3 different sizes of pipe because the oil company did not know what size was used in their piping. We literally, when we were done, we had a piping diagram of the fiberglass pipe buried in the ground. It matched their flow rates to the battery, matched the sizes of the pipe. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Anybody else? Well, thank you, Robert. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Robert. And I see that our panelists were busy this morning and they have arrived, so I'll call all three of them up, Marlo Anderson, Dave Blair, and Katie Aquino.
If everybody kind of moved over here in the middle, I think it would be better received. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of coming in these tables here. Thank you.
It's sort of like church, everybody sits at the back because nobody wants to be in view of, but if we could compress like Dave suggested, that would be great. If not, stay where you are.
We'd also like to invite Dr. Gunderson up as well.
Dr. Gunderson?
If you don't mind.
So let Marlo kick off here. He's certainly no stranger to everyone here and certainly is a big part of putting on this conference. So I'll turn it over to you, Marlo. Thank you.
Thank you much, Sinclair. Marlo Anderson. I am with Zuvio Incorporated, and we're going to talk a little bit about, not that the company that I run has anything to do with autonomous vehicles, but we're going to be talking about that as well as some other technology. On the panel, we have Miss Metaverse Katie Aquino, we have Dr. Paul Gunderson, and Mr. Dave Blair, and I don't think anybody there is a stranger to anybody as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the future of transportation and probably scare you a little bit, and the people that are at the panel here have no clue what they're about ready to see or hear as well. I want them to, we want discussion that's going to go on over this panel, and of course we encourage your questions as well. So with that, of course we just invited Dr. Gunderson up here, so he will not be part of these slides there. Thank you, by the way, Dr. Gunderson, for joining us. So in the future, these are the challenges that we have facing our country when it comes to transportation. We will have a population boom, as you can see, coming at us. By the year 2045, we will have an additional 70 million people living in this country. So, of course, that's going to really tax our infrastructure a little bit. The other issue that we have, that we spend over 40 hours stuck in traffic every year right now. I'm just throwing some of the fun things that are going on. The cost of congestion. Annually, right now, $121 billion a year. Our population is getting older. By 2045, the number of Americans over age 65 will increase by 77%. So you think about the baby boomers coming of age now, well, that trend continues as we move forward. Millennials are shaped by technology. You know, Miss Metaverse here the other night talked about the generational gap. That's what we're facing right now as well. There are people like you and I, well, not everybody in this room, but there's a few of us my age and older, that maybe haven't embraced technology like we should have. Or you know, back up a little bit here, I guess, but that's always a thing for us. I mean, there's always that generational divide. It's just that it seems to be wider now. I mean, you think about the days 100 years ago when we were shifting from basically horse and buggy to the horseless carriage. It's hard to believe that's only 100 years ago when we look at what we have going on now. But there was a generational divide there as well. I mean, the older population didn't want to give up horses. It was a huge debate. It divided this country. And it took 20 years before we started seeing any semblance of roads and that type of thing, because it took that long for people to actually think about the possibility of cars being better than horses. And of course, I don't think there's anybody in this room, maybe except for Steve, that would like to see horses back on the road. But, that gives you an idea about what we have going on right now. because, you know, we have this generational divide. We have people that are coming of adult age that have no clue what anything other than a cell phone is. I mean, everybody in this room probably knows what a rotary phone is, party lines. By the way, I heard this morning that there are still 5,000 party lines in this country. So just to give you an idea, but that's probably another 2 years that'll be gone too. And I bet you most of those people have cell phones. That's probably why they don't give up their party lines, because it doesn't matter to them anymore. Income equality, 10% of the population takes home 1/3 of our national income, and that will continue to divide as well. And then that bottom map there, those are by 2045 what they consider what will be the new mega regions. And what's interesting, of course, the West Coast probably doesn't really surprise anybody. Texas, probably not a whole lot. Florida, not so much. But look what happens around that Chicago area into Minnesota. And then also look what happens right through the middle of the country. And those areas will continue to grow. I'm not sure if our region will, you know, maybe they're not reflecting that as well as they probably should, because I have a feeling our region is going to grow as well. All right, so next up. Well, I wish my eyesight was better so I could actually see that monitor there. So, don't laugh, Katie. By 2045, transportation and the economy, the U.S. economy is forecast to grow by 115% to $36.7 trillion, and the transportation sector represent $1.6 trillion of that. So, what is that, about 2% or so of the total gross domestic product will be transportation. Interesting, global demand for U.S. products, 1 billion in exports, 5,000 U.S. jobs. I'm trying to read all of it there. U.S. exports will reach 2.3 trillion in 2013. So this slide is a little bit old here, but it goes to show you that things are continuing to move upwards as far as exports go as well. The energy boom is placing unprecedented demand on our transportation system. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would disagree with that. Crude oil production is up 50% since 2008. Rail carried 400,000 carloads of crude oil in 2013. And again, that's, I'm sure, gone up dramatically since then as well. 2014 U.S. freight volume will grow to 29 billion tons, an increase of 45%. Again, really taxing the current infrastructure that we have. I'm just going to kind of move on from there. Transportation investment. So what I'm scaring you with here is that we're going to be moving more and more goods all the time. But what's scary about it is that we're not investing in our infrastructure, and that number will continue to decline. So 120 billion for highways and bridges between 2015 and 2020. The current annual spending at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, $83.1 billion. $43 billion for public transportation. Meanwhile, annual capital spending is just $17.1 billion. So you can see, and then on the bottom graph there, it shows, this is the big concern. Technology will continue to get better. Our modes of transportation are probably going to change. And how do we fund our roads? Because as our mileage gets better in our cars, of course that's the big goal, but we have gasoline taxes. So as that gasoline tax number declines, which it's doing right now, we actually consume less fuel now than we did 3 years ago in this country, and that mode they think will continue to go. So we have that challenge in front of us. And in fact, Oregon, that's on the right side there, they've gone to a test pilot program where they just charge $1.56 a mile. That includes the fuel cost. That's their tax and everything. So how many of you would like to pay $1.56 a mile when you're moving goods right now? One person. Wow. Victoria. That's expensive. I mean, if you were moving a car down the road and you were paying $1.56 a mile, you'd probably think twice about driving from Bismarck to Fargo if that cost you $300 to roll over there right now. So, but that's what we're talking about here. So they're experimenting with things simply because the base for the funding is disappearing. So how do we solve this? Well, there you go. I'm scaring you a little bit now, I guess. But And that's probably how a lot of you feel when you take a look at this, is that you want to pull your hair out of your head, because if you have any left, unlike me, that's what I do all the time. That's why, yeah, stop that, Larry, that's good. But there are ideas that are progressing that will address some of these issues, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is driverless or autonomous vehicles. And we think that there's a lot of momentum in this industry. You've heard a lot about it the last couple of days. And one of the things that autonomous vehicles will do is they are much more efficient on our roadways. You know, you don't have to worry so much about night travel. In fact, our autonomous vehicles can move goods 24/7 in the current infrastructure that we have now. So maybe we don't need as many roads in the future because of that. The safety concerns, and that's a huge deal, by the way. Imagine eliminating 9 of every 10 car crashes. 90% less fatalities because we have automated vehicles. That to me, that's the number one reason that I advocate this technology, is because of the safety concerns and the money that saves and the time that saves. I mean, everything rolls into that. And then, of course, that same technology moves to our airports. How many of you have ever circled an airport or when you're landing for hours and hours on end because they don't have a place for you to land your plane? You know, it happens to us all the time. That's probably going to go away in the next couple of years because they'll become more efficient with that as well. They'll be able to time the planes when they're coming in and land them appropriately. So there's all kinds of cool things that are going to happen with that. So anyway, with that, let's send the microphone down to Dave, and we're just going to kind of discuss a little bit about autonomous vehicles and where we see this going in the future. Congratulations, Dave.
Put me on the spot, right? When me and Marla were brainstorming here about 1.5 years ago about, promoting this conference and doing something a little bit different, we came up with this idea of this autonomous friendly corridor connecting Canada to Mexico. And what does that mean? And what could it mean both for the Central North American Trade Corridor, but in general, of how we could position ourselves in creating this corridor, whether it's a transportation corridor, energy corridor, and we're not so hung up on Highway 83, and I want to make that really clear. But that was kind of the emphasis we put together in regards to how we wanted to utilize that north-south route from Canada down into Mexico, and it's the only highway that does connect all of our states going north and south: North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. So then we said, well, let's start looking at where the industry's at on the autonomous vehicles. And, we know what's going on with drones, but we wanted to really get a better idea of what's happening on the autonomous side of things. We really worked hard in trying to get a few of those vehicles up here for our demonstration on Monday. There was a little conflict because of a national show going on, but, I think that we all know that industry is moving in that direction. There's been so many articles about Google and what they've done with their autonomous vehicle. And then the trucking industry, Freightliner, what they're doing. Europe's way ahead of us in regards to that. But, I think, Marlo nailed it when he said, what is that autonomous vehicle going to do for us in the future? And we know that there's going to be a lot of savings when it comes to that. And I'm just going to quote on one thing that's really interesting, and that's on the insurance side of things. 90% of all the crashes are driver error, and it costs the insurance industry, which is us, around $30 billion for insurance. That's just in the United States. Considering that there's 16% of uninsured vehicles out there as well. But industry is saying that with these autonomous vehicles, they figure that they can cut the savings by 50%. And that's a huge number. if you think about it. So I think yesterday about dreaming big and understanding where things are going to be at. You know, I'm not sure how I feel about riding in an autonomous vehicle yet, where I tell the car to take me home. There's probably times when I was a lot younger that I wish I would have had a car like that. But you know, I think it's here, it's coming. Whether it's 2 years or 5 years down the road, I think the freight side of things is going to be phenomenal of moving goods and having the opportunity not to strain our fleet of drivers, because that's becoming harder and harder too, those long haul drivers. So the trucking industry is looking at this very seriously as well. So I don't know, I hope that answers a little bit about what I see happening.
All right. Speaking not so much from the UAV industry itself, in part because I'm not General Palmer, although he and I collaborate often, particularly in Rotary meetings and that kind of thing. But speaking from the agricultural perspective, we already know that the movement towards the use of autonomous technology will make a huge difference on the liability side. Generally speaking, in terms of injury and disease, most of that occurs as a result of people being placed in hazardous work environments. Those work environments are what cost agriculturalists, production folks, a lot of money. And in fact, the number of firms across the nation who are willing to carry agricultural enterprises and cover them, particularly in terms of liability coverage, is decreasing across time. The result of that is to push the agricultural industry towards generating much safer workplaces in which humans can exist. That means autonomous technology. There's just really no other way of dealing with that whole environment. And it's everything from confined space on one end, whether it's a manure holding structure or a grain storage structure, all the way to what happens in open agricultural terrain on the other end. The day when agricultural producers will turn over a tractor and kill themselves or injure themselves is past. And anyone who does that today is clearly inflicting self-injury and self-death on themselves, because the technology exists to prevent virtually all of that. So from the liability side, there are huge developments that are unfolding. Secondly, with respect to transport of agricultural produce, agricultural products are bulky, whether it's livestock, grain, lumber, because in many cases, even in a state like North Dakota, we have an emerging lumber industry along the river watersheds and river bottoms. When we transport those products, there's keen interest in ensuring that those products reach their market destination in the right condition. If we're transporting livestock, that's a particular concern. And in fact, since my farm is located almost adjacent to Highway 52, going from the far northwestern part of the state down all the way into the greater Fargo-Moorhead area, I will see on average something approaching 22 semis a day from Canada transporting hogs to slaughter. That product needs to arrive in Green Bay or in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or across the river into Iowa to the slaughter plants in good condition. Watered, dewatered, whatever. So the autonomous technology holds real promise, because that will shorten the distance from farm to market appreciably, since except for fuel stops, there's nothing else that prevents that vehicle from remaining on the road continuously. So there are huge differences there. There are huge impacts there. The same holds true for perishable foods. You know, one of the major problems with the natural food and organic food movement is that by and large, the acreage has to be fairly close to a metropolitan area in order to make that business model work. And we know that because North Dakota has the largest contiguous organic acreage in the nation. It's right west of Jamestown. And it's a huge area. But the vast majority of what's being raised on that acreage is organic flax, organic wheat, products that are not perishable. But if you and I go in to a grocery store, what do we see up and down those lanes and those aisles? Primarily perishable food product. With autonomous transportation, road surface transportation, we now face the prospect of potentially shortening that time from harvest to market in a most appreciable manner. And that will serve to move that business model, which can work, much further out from major metropolitan areas so that your slide, which depicted the mega cities of the future, all of a sudden becomes reachable for those of us who are not necessarily within 35 miles of that kind of an environment. The third implication that I see off of what I just heard this morning in the last few minutes, from an autonomous perspective, is the potential for development of a brand new array of vehicles using the nation's airspace. Unmanned aerial systems per se don't have to be tiny. We know that from the military experience. And the UPSs of the future world, some of whom serve the agricultural industry, if I didn't have UPS, I'd be out of business in terms of parts arriving at my farm in time to permit me and our two renters to continue to function in a timely manner. Autonomous technology offers a significant advantage because now one doesn't worry any longer about hours that a pilot has flown or not flown in order to move aircraft and goods and services from one area of the nation to the other. You see, if I want parts for any one of the green tractors that I'm running at this point in time, the vast majority of those parts are coming out of the Quad Cities, Iowa and Illinois. By truck, that's hard to do overnight. Very hard to do. It's an 18-hour trip by truck to get either to Minot or to Harvey or even Jamestown. The autonomous promise will change all of that rather remarkably. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to our guest to my right.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I have kind of a different perspective on autonomous vehicles. I mean, of course, I do believe that there are a lot of great benefits for transportation. Of course, many of us know that autonomous cars will help save on fuel costs, especially when there are, a lot of trucks are riding together in a line. There's a lot of studies saying that by, having a lot of these trucks in a line traveling together, they're actually going to save a lot of money, and these trucks will be communicating with one another, just like the slide before that Marlo had. That's called the Inspiration Truck, and I spoke about the Inspiration Truck the other day during my keynote on the future of transportation. So one of the things about autonomous cars that I find really exciting is kind of like the 1929 Futurama exhibit that GE had. And it was all about, lifestyles of the future. We'll have cars that drive themselves. And it was really cool to see because if you watch the videos on YouTube that feature the Futurama exhibit, GE was really ahead of their time. They saw this vision of how we could be living. And their autonomous highway was that cars, right, were luxury living rooms that had wheels on them. Basically, a family could be playing cards together in the car as it's driving. And that another great thing was that it would automatically become autonomous as soon as it went on a highway. So that's kind of where we're starting off now with the autonomous cars, is that a lot of these autonomous cars are going to begin as semi-autonomous, taking over features such as assisted parking and also taking over on the highway. So yeah, there's a lot of great things about autonomous cars that will be coming out. Another thing too is Volvo recently said that by 2019 they plan to have 100 fully autonomous vehicles in the hands of potential customers in Sweden. And they really want to prove, both Google and Volvo, many of these companies, they just want to prove that, with as few as 28 lasers, cameras, and radars and sensors, cameras and everything, the systems, that you can make a car fully autonomous and rely on it 100%. And it can only cost $5,000 to make a car fully autonomous. That's what we're looking at in the future. It's going to be low cost to do this, to convert any car to an autonomous vehicle. So I think the convergence of many of these different trends that are happening right now will be making life a lot easier. I think that cars will be a lot better. And also another thing too, software systems and computers are going to be just advancing like really very, very, very fast. Rapid acceleration of the computing power we'll be seeing. And another thing too is that supercomputers, right? The Watson supercomputer excited all of us when it first came out, right? I mean, it won Jeopardy. Everyone was excited about, what can a supercomputer do? Well, supercomputers are also going to be in our cars. And the car of the future will have a supercomputer the size of a car stereo. And that car inside your car, I mean, that computer inside your car can have more computing power than computers we have today. It's a supercomputer. It's going to be connected to everything. So I think what a car means to us, in our lives in the future will have a big, huge change. I think that we're going to be using cars to work as mobile offices. I think that we'll be using cars for a lot of different purposes, but I think the technology will be giving us a lot more than we have today, and there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to. So I'll turn it over to Marlo now.
So as you can see, 3 different people, 3 different visions, but I think everybody that's up here realizes that this is coming and is a positive change. I look at the infrastructure needs that we have in our country. Like I mentioned before, that I really think that this is going to improve that infrastructure. We're not going to be having to put as much money into roads simply because they're going to get utilized better. So you have to kind of look at that. Katie's analogy of well, I shouldn't say analogy, but you're talking about the price of changing a car to an autonomous vehicle. So I'll back up here just a little bit. Okay, so this car right here, this is the Delphi car. This is a car that actually just drove from, I think it was Los Angeles to New York in April. Many of you probably heard about this. This is actually the same car I rode in willy-nilly through Las Vegas a couple months ago. And, people are always interested. Yes, Michael, if you would have joined me this year, you could have rode in this car, as a matter of fact. So Michael Hofferth back there, by the way, he's been a frequent travel companion of mine to CES. So good to see you here, by the way, Michael. So this car, people are apprehensive maybe about jumping in an autonomous vehicle or that type of thing. I was too. The first time I got in a car, that was 2 years ago, it was a Mercedes car, and the doctor, the engineer of this vehicle invited me to come down and take a ride in it, and they put me in the back seat. And I thought that was kind of unusual right away. There's no driver. In fact, they had to put a dummy in the driver's seat because people were like, "Hey, Martha!" And the people were actually driving into the car through the streets of Las Vegas because they were amazed that this thing was going down the road with no driver in it. So they put this dummy with a chauffeur's hat on there so people wouldn't be distracted by that. But got in the car asked me where I wanted to go. It asked me how I was doing. It was like, "Mr. Anderson, how are you doing today?" I thought there was a microphone in there and somebody was talking to me, but I was talking to the car, "Where'd you like to go?" And I said where I wanted to go, and it drove me there. So this technology is here now, but people are a little apprehensive about it. So what I've done here as we're going through the slides is that there's steps that the manufacturers of vehicles, and I know we talk a lot about cars, but think of it as vehicles. And we're talking about the ability to transport goods with this as well. Katie mentioned Volvo. They're also developing a semi-less trailer, I guess you could call it. There's no semi on the front of this. The motor is mounted underneath the trailer, and you program it and it will drive. So it's a moving flatbed down our highways. So that's where we're moving with this. You know, so these long haul drivers, you know, Dr. Gunderson was referring to, you know, the ability to move things quicker across our country, and that's going to be a reality. I mean, you simply put, I mean, if you need to move something from Texas to North Dakota, and what normally would take 3 days because of the laws and regulations that we have nowadays, I mean, you know, a driver can legally drive, what, 8 or 9 hours at a time or whatever. That doesn't impact autonomous vehicles at all. I mean, you think about it, that these vehicles can be driving 24/7. Has a huge impact on how much we can move in our country. So I think that's a cool thing with autonomous vehicles. So we're going to be moving through some steps. So the first thing you see is V2V communication. Are you familiar with V2V, Kate? Okay, so I'm going to let her take over and explain what that is.
Right. So V2V, vehicle to vehicle, means that cars will be communicating with one another. And as I also discussed the other day, you know, the Internet of Things, everything is going to be connected and speaking to one another. A lot of advancements with the autonomous cars, and one of the greatest benefits is, let's say if you're driving down the road and someone stops this big truck right in front of you and you have to stop, right? Naturally, we would think about trying to slam our foot on the brake and try to get out of the way of the car. But these cars are so advanced now that when, let's say something like this happens, the car will know which side would be better to go to safely get around this vehicle. So it's very advanced, and these cars do communicate with one another, and it's great. It's a lot of good things coming out of it. I think there's also a lot of other great ways that these type of systems will be able to benefit companies as well. I think that using an array of different sensors and being able to customize autonomous cars for transportation could help companies by knowing how much exact product is in there. You can actually customize your cars to whatever needs that you might have. I mean, depending on what industry you're having, I think that with this type of technology, we'll be able to do a lot more and have a greater hold on our cargo and our people and their drivers, and really be able to monitor at all times, you know, where everything is at and how things are coming along. So it's definitely exciting.
Thank you, Katie. So B2B communication, that means what to everybody? And basically, cars will communicate with each other, just like what Katie was talking about. So when is this going to happen? When you buy your car in 2016, that car will have V2V communication built into it. So the industry has already taken a hold of this technology, and they're going to start using it. Another example I like to give is if somebody hits a deer a half a mile in front of you, you know, you're traveling down the interstate at 75 miles an hour, and there's a car that's at a dead stop a half mile in front of you, your car will tell you that this has happened. You know, there's a lot of things, or the semi or whatever that's traveling down the road. So there's a lot of things that will happen because of V2V communication. Yes.
I just want to add one more thing too about V2V. So there's an app called Waze. Have any of you heard of Waze before? We have Victoria in the back. She has her finger on the pulse of technology right there. Okay, so Waze is W-A-Z-E. It's an incredible, great app. What it does is it's crowdsourced. So basically, everyone, and there's so many people using it everywhere, all over the United States. So when you go to drive, it's a navigation app. So basically, instead of using, let's say, your iPhone's Maps or Google Maps, you can use Waze, W-A-Z-E, for navigating to where you have to go. So you type in your location where you're going to go. It pulls it up. You can sign up for Waze using Facebook or your telephone number. And what's great about it is that you are part of this crowdsourced information superhighway of Waze, because the way it works is that people report where traffic cameras are. You can report where an accident is. You can report how fast people are driving down a certain highway. Waze is excellent because it's constantly connecting other cars and other drivers together in real time. So you know where a police officer is, you know where the traffic cameras are, you know there's a pothole on the road, you know all the things. This is all relying on other users. It's all crowd-based information. Very, very, very great. I mean, it's advanced for its time. Now, I believe that this type of technology, right, we rely on it using our cell phones. The difference is that this technology will be a part of our V2V. It's only going to become much more advanced, and we'll have real-time tracking and statistics that will help us get through our daily routines that are driving easier than ever.
Thank you, Katie. All right, so next up on the list is assisted cruise control. How many on the panel are familiar with that? Dr. Gunderson? Okay.
It's interesting you should mention that because within the agricultural industry, we've had cruise control since 2002 in our tractors. In fact, one of the observations I make to our students, about half of whom are too young to remember or to know, is that there is more computer technology manufactured in the tractor cabs in 2015 than was deployed to fly the first flight on the backside of the moon. Now, admittedly, we're 4 decades away. But for our young students, there's no notion of what that life was like. But I remember it vividly because I had just returned from 5 years in the Australian protectorate of Papua New Guinea. And the notion that men, should be flying around the backside of the moon eventually was leagues away from the students I was teaching there, who would show up on the first day of class with spears in their hands. The world has changed dramatically. So indeed, it's here, and it's a part of the working life of a number of us who are involved day to day.
Thank you, Dr. Gunderson. So basically, in 2016 as well, assisted cruise control will allow you to take your hands off the wheel when you're going down the interstate. You have to be moving, I think it's either 60 or 65 miles an hour. You push your cruise control, and if you have the new Mercedes, I don't think you can go to sleep, but you can certainly enjoy the ride a little bit more. So another baby step towards autonomous vehicles happening in 2016, and that's, what, 7 months away? When's the 2016 vehicles normally come out? They come out pretty shortly, don't they? August or September, okay. So we're talking probably 4 months away that you're gonna start being able to buy this technology in your new cars. Next up on the list is crash avoidance. Mr. Dave, are you familiar with that at all?
I was thinking about, autonomous vehicle and what it could mean in a difference in my life because I drive a lot. And I was also thinking about up here where we have whiteouts, where we have blizzards, and we're on the road, and it's scary. I think we've all been there. We don't know what's in front of us, right? If there's a vehicle that's got pulled over or it's out of disabled, and we don't see it until we come on top of it, right? Or the snow plows that are blowing that snow. So, the crash avoidance part of these cars is going to be something that, I think we're all going to embrace and going, wow, this is really cool stuff. I know that, back to the cruise control and kind of turning things over. I don't know how many of you guys have had issues with your cruise control, but you get so spoiled when you set it and then you just, go. When it doesn't work, man, you're going, man, this is a pain in the butt. I have to accelerate back and forth and gas mileage and everything that comes with it. But, I think there's going to be so many opportunities to avoid crashes because of that technology that's going to be introduced in the cars. I'm just wondering, too, if some of that is going to be able to be retrofitted into existing cars, or if it's going to be the new technology built in, obviously, into the vehicles themselves. And I'm sure that, you know, we already know that we've got phone capabilities in cars right now, you know, because the issues of texting and driving, and now you can be able to talk to your car and communicate. So it's there, and it's going to continue to improve.
Yeah, I think that there will be some adaptation kits for vehicles. I think Delphi is actually one that's working on that right now. But I don't see that coming in the near future. I mean, you're not going to be able to take a 1996 vehicle, for example, and probably adapt it. It's going to have to be a newer model that doesn't have autonomous features. But there certainly will be that going on out there. So again, crash avoidance. Does anybody in the audience now have a vehicle that has crash avoidance built into it? The driver. I guess you're right. So there are some vehicles out right now that actually have crash avoidance technology built into them, not us. So and it is kind of cool, and that will be some another way as you're buying vehicles in the future that they get us to this point of getting used to autonomous vehicles. Dave, by the way, I rented a car recently, and as hard as this is to believe, I don't know if I just thought cruise control was standard on everything nowadays. I actually got a car that didn't have cruise control in it, and I drove about 100 miles, and I actually went and found the car rental place and said, I can't drive this car. I'm so used to having cruise control on long trips that you're right, it's kind of a pain when you don't have it now. And I can't imagine, I mean, we used to drive them all the time without that, so that's an interesting point. Parking lot, Dr. Gunderson, yes.
I was only going to comment on the retrofitting side, that offers excellent opportunity on the economic development arena. We already have in Fargo 2 firms, Reinhardt Incorporated and a second firm, who are well along on the agricultural side in developing and deploying the technology for crash and avoidance. In the one case for UAV technology use, and in the other case for farm tractor and farm truck use. Now, with relatively little adaptation, that can move into the commercial market. And I would further add that in our own program, we will be deploying one of the first autonomous lawnmowers in the world this summer. Now, there is some technology out there. John Deere has been toying with it. Toro has had a program for a while. We won't do the whole works. We can't do the sonography visioning out in front. But in terms of using global positioning systems, we will have our entire acreage around our classroom area mowed all summer long with an autonomous mower.
I can borrow that, right?
Possibly.
I have another test plot here in Mandan.
All right.
I'd be happy for you to
But
use
that's
that,
all
so.
retrofit.
That's cool stuff.
We pull the steering wheel off of that mower, and we simply retrofit an entire automated steering system to it.
So you're not putting like an invisible fence around the yard? Like
no, that's the next step. That takes the sonographic imaging, and that's more complex. But the basic stuff will work.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah. So next up then is the parking lot valet service. Katie, are you familiar with this? I think Dr. Gunderson is. Kind of, yes. Using your tablet or your phone. Okay, yep.
Okay, I think he's talking about features like what Tesla has. Tesla's Model S has a smartphone app that basically you can have the car drive for you and pull up just like a valet, and also park into a space for you. So a lot of these great things are just constantly being upgraded. And what's really neat about cars like Tesla's cars is that when these new features come out, it's just an upgrade on the app, and then all of a sudden you can do more neat and more autonomous type of things using the app. And that's what we're seeing in the future. It's all about getting the initial hardware and then having lots of software upgrades. It's I call this upgradia. It's a trend that basically we want to be able to keep things and not have to keep on buying new things, and just have the ability to continuously update whatever we have for the long term.
Autonomous self-parking is a fascinating idea, and I reflect back to the world that I once occupied full-time. If I'm a patient in a medical care facility, that's a wonderful opportunity for development. And in fact, we have major centers. The University of Iowa, for instance, where I'm at a good bit of the time, because I have an academic appointment there, is currently erecting a new parking garage, 9 stories, to match a new pediatric facility that is being erected. That facility is being built to accommodate the TELSA technology as it unfolds. And, you know, forward thinking in terms of where might technology like this be first deployed in a way that really makes a difference on the customer service side. And that's a part of it.
I just need to tell a kind of a funny story. This happened probably about 20 years ago when me and my wife were visiting some friends of ours in Chicago. And we went downtown and went to this restaurant. I remember it's called Ed DeBibiak's. It's kind of a 50s theme. And it took us forever to find a parking spot, and we had to walk a couple miles. So we finally got there. And there was this other couple coming in at the same time. And this young man, dressed really nice, came up and he says, "Can I park your car? You know, we have valet parking." And I looked at Stephen going, "Oh, these guys got valet parking. Why didn't we take advantage of this?" And he said, "I didn't know they had valet parking." Well, anyway, we had a nice meal and everything, and we happened to finish at the same time this other couple did. We came walking out with them, and, you know, and we said, "Hey, you know, how was the meal? Everything fine?" Stuff like that. And he was looking around, and he says, "I wonder where that valet parking attendant is." And finally, he went back inside and came back out, and he says, "I just found out they don't have valet parking here." So, you know, maybe this will take care of the situation. You can just do it yourself, right?
All right, so the advantages, and this is actually coming out right now. The Tesla model obviously is having this, but how it works basically is if you go to a shopping mall or a medical facility or whatever, you just basically pull your iPhone out or your Droid, and if you have the app for the vehicle, and you tell it to go park itself. And when you come back out of the shopping mall, it'll come back and get you at the door. So these are technologies again, and because it's on private property, they're allowed to do this type of thing right now. So that's kind of exciting about that as well. The other thing that I find interesting is that with valet service or self-parking cars like this is that there are places that I know the car will fit that I would never attempt to manually try to park my car. I mean, I'm sure you think about this. I mean, and I've had this happen plenty of times too when I park in a shopping mall and I come back out and I'm like, how do these idiots, why do they park so close to the car? I mean, I had wide open before I come back out. I can't even get into my car anymore, right? Well, with the valet service, you just turn it on from your Droid or your iPhone and it'll back the car out so that you can get into your car. So these are things that, again, another baby step towards autonomous vehicles that'll be coming out very shortly. Speaking of that, I don't know, now, are you familiar with what Tesla's doing this summer? Okay, as far as the upgrade to autonomous driving?
Okay, so yes, Tesla announced that Tesla already has the ability to have it all autonomous.
They just didn't let anybody know till recently. So you bought a car not knowing you even had this feature, so go ahead.
Exactly what he said. So basically Tesla already had all this built into the cars. It's just that it just had to be turned on. And of course, you know, as we were saying with legislation, it's an issue. Legislation's what's holding back a lot of this autonomous technology from being accessed and used. But Tesla said that they will be rolling out semi-autonomous features, as we just discussed before with the parking and the valet service.
Yeah, and basically what's going to happen, there's some type of firmware upgrade that's going to happen over the summer. So if you own a couple of models of Tesla, they're just going to turn the features on. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future if Ford or Chrysler or Chevrolet do the same thing when you buy a car and then 3 years later they say, oh, by the way, we're going to turn the autonomous part on now. So you never know what's going to happen there. Now this is the Inspire truck that Katie was just talking about. This is put out by Daimler. This actually was test driven last week in Nevada. I think, did anybody follow that at all? Dr. Gunderson, did you? Okay, I'm going to turn the mic. Go ahead and grab the mic there. Why don't you talk a little bit about it? Oh, okay. So anyway, it was basically the first test of a truck in the United States. Mercedes, Volvo. If you go to YouTube and just type in autonomous truck, you'll find some videos that are out there now that have been done in Europe. That is absolutely astounding. In fact, there's one in real traffic situations, and they actually have the driver of the truck. It's basically an office. He swings this chair 90 degrees away from the wheel, and he's working on his computer. He's booking another job while he's doing there, all while the truck is going down. There's an ambulance that goes rolling by, and as this ambulance comes up to him, the truck pulls off to the side by itself. It doesn't totally stop, but it stays with the other traffic as it slows down and moves over. It's absolutely amazing. And Europe, of course, they're a little more, I won't say they're more progressive, they just don't have the issues of moving some of this technology forward. However, and I'm going to quote Katie on this, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes if they're a leader, they can kind of shake out the bugs, so to speak, of the technology, and then we can embrace and move forward from that. So, all right, I think that's it for autonomous vehicles, and I'm just going to open up to questions real quick before we move into UAVs. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for anybody on the panel?
Yeah, I actually have 3 questions, if I could give all 3 of them. The first one is, you talk about all the positives. Are there any negatives?
I think there's always negative sides to any kind of technology. As Marla was saying before, that there's a lot of people who just simply don't trust or believe in autonomous vehicle technology. And there's a lot of people talking about that. Even with the Google car, there's negative sides to anything. People are looking at Google recently announced that they had 11 minor accidents in the last 6 years of the Google car, the autonomous Google car. And while some people could look at that and be very, negative about it, and then there's also people, who are more optimistic saying, okay, they're very, very minor accidents, compared to how many horrible accidents happen with real human drivers. So it's all about how you look at it, really. I mean, there's always going to be negative sides to any technology, and there's also going to be people who are very skeptical as well.
The answer is yes, there are negatives. In the agriculture environment, there are 3. The first is that what we see as these technologies move onto farms and ranches, there's a natural inclination to lengthen the workday because the operator perceives they still need to be there, even if they're not per se in the tractor cab, or they're not doing a lot in the tractor cab or the truck cab, whatever it is. So we see a lot of predilection or incentivization to lengthen the workday. Within agricultural environments, we know, we've done this research repeatedly, there's a dose-response relationship between disease and injury in the agricultural workplace, and it translates this way. The longer you work in that environment, the more likely you are going to be injured or have some other recurrent health condition. That's just a given. We know that. That being said, there are 2 other issues. The second one is related to the first one, and that is the incidence of back and repetitive motion injury that operators experience when they're using this technology typically increases. So clearly the manufacturers of these devices, as well as their designers, in terms of cab ergonomics, the management of the functions that are in front and to the sides of the operator, that's no small matter. That's a huge deal, particularly if you're going to have long operational times in that technology. So those are the 3 things that we see.
I think one other issue, and we kind of addressed that a little bit this year when we were up at the Capitol, because the state has been looking at, regulations. Where are they going to be at? Because this is all new territory for them. And, and then, you talk about, different states And is every state going to allow autonomous vehicles? And how do you work around that? And then, you know, on the federal level, you know, them getting involved. So I think you have a lot of those issues. And then, you know, even across border, you know, what's Canada going to do? You know, and they're going to allow that to vehicles to travel, but when they get to the United States, can't. So I think that, you know, there's work to be done on the legislative side of things for regulations. So, and, you know, a lot of states are looking at that. North Dakota is looking at it right now and doing some preliminary study of what do we have to do to change that environment.
Okay, then I'm going to give my other two questions kind of together. Okay. Let me throw my other two questions out too, because they're somewhat related. One is safety features for malfunctions. I mean, I understand it's probably safer than what we have now, but you know, I grew up my whole life around mechanical things, and they don't always work exactly how they're designed. So what happens when it doesn't work, and what safety features do they have in there? The other one is cost. I mean, I understand that it may be fairly low cost up front to make a vehicle like this, but what I've experienced with vehicles is even today's vehicles, there's so many sensors on them, and a lot of times the particular function works fine, but the sensor went out. I mean, and I think anti-lock brakes is a great example. But then it costs $400 to $600 to put the sensor in. So I worry about large number of sensors and things in a vehicle that it probably doesn't cost much to put it in, but it costs a lot if you have a problem.
All great points. The safety feature, first of all, the cars that I've been in, I've actually driven in 5 autonomous vehicles, been behind the wheel on 2 of them. At any time, if you grab the wheel, it disengages the autonomous feature. So if you're, and in fact, you know, one of the stories that I have about that is that I didn't agree with the following distance of the car. So I was always, when the first time I was in the car and I was behind the wheel, I was always grabbing the wheel and hitting the brakes because I thought we were traveling too close. You know, I've always been a firm believer of giving a little extra space. Well, the autonomous vehicle reacts dramatically quicker than I ever would, and of course, I have other stories that I can illustrate that with. But so it actually was a problem for me right away because I was always grabbing the steering wheel and hitting the brake and it would turn off the autonomous feature, and that will always be in place. So if you disagree with what the car is doing and you're behind the wheel, and in fact, as we move forward, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's shared by many people in the industry, as long as you have somebody behind the wheel, this technology will move forward. And there's not a lot of laws that will be needed to be passed or regulation in place to stop that from happening. Think about when the industry introduced cruise control, for example. They didn't go get legislative approval for that. I think that'll be the same there. Where that happens is when we move to the back seat and the car is driving us, then there's some laws that have to be passed. But so there's some of those that are in there. The sensors thing, you're absolutely right. You know, the thing I could probably counter that with would be that we'll have substantially less accidents. So maybe the cost of the additional sensors would be dramatically offset because we're having a lot fewer accidents. So I'm hoping that's the case. But I agree with you. There's going to be cost. Early integrators to this technology are gonna have a much greater cost as we move forward, but that's probably what we're gonna do. One of the things too is going to be that you know, cars are probably going to get lighter as we move forward because they won't, because we're in less crashes. Maybe we don't need to have all these other safety things. You know, the width of the bumper to the cab, for example, might be able to be reduced and things like that. I'm just kind of throwing that stuff out. So anybody else on that?
If we use the agricultural experience as something of a precursor to this whole arena, we make 2 observations. First of all, the initial purchase is one matter. The replacement when the technology no longer functions correctly is quite another. That remains an issue in the agricultural arena. But I will also add that one of the things that agricultural equipment manufacturers have discovered It runs along the following lines. Agricultural producers, particularly males, have an unbelievable romance with the welder. And if there's any way in which they can stick two pieces of metal together and fuse it, by gum, they'll do it. So, for example, in this state, we have Melrose Bobcat manufacturing skid steers, and we have the vast majority of the Case IH skid steers sold domestically across North America, assembled, manufactured, and assembled in Fargo at their plant. One of the things they have done from an engineering perspective is deliberately engineer out that predilection of agricultural producers to attach a welding rod to the skid steers. And here's how they did it. They placed virtually all of the controls for that equipment in the upper cab structure. So the moment a producer tries to take that cab off, they've essentially disabled that entire piece of equipment. And normally speaking, in order to weld on it, you've got to take the cab off because you want to disable virtually any possibility of transmitting electronic signals or arcing into the electrical systems embedded in that technology. In fact, one of the things that the user manuals make very clear to producers, you touch this equipment with an arc welder of any sort, and you've automatically disabled the guarantees and the warranties. So that's another interesting perspective on all of that.
All right. And Larry, you're going to be first up after lunch. So just remember your question, okay? One last thing on the safety issue that I get a lot of questions about is the ability of people to hack into your car. And I'm sure many of you have concerns with that. And I think it is an ongoing concern. And I would imagine it's probably going to be possible, you know, and then maybe the ability of somebody to take over your car. I always think about airplanes when it comes to the ability of other people to maybe, and this is one of the, I think a lot about, you know, fleet management in the future and the ability to maybe remotely control vehicles. So let's say you have a trucking firm, maybe you have one person operating 5 or 10 rigs from your office. So I think about that a lot, and I think we're going to be moving in that direction in the future. And I have a lot of people that say, well, if you have that vision with this, what stops other people from taking it over? And there's probably a little bit of security risk with that, but I don't know if there's anybody in this room that maybe on 9/11 would have really wished that we would have had somebody that could have taken over those planes, you know, from the ground. And, you know, there's a lot of incidents with aircraft that, you know, if they deviate from a flight plan or whatever, that if you had the ability to take over that flight from the ground, that many countless lives would have been saved, and, you know, many incidents. So I think that these technologies, you know, even though there's some bad that can happen with them, there's equally and probably greater good. So that's the way you kind of have to approach some of this stuff. So with that, yes.
I got an interesting quote that will leave with you, and it comes from Peter Cheney, who is award-winning writer for Drive section of the Globe and Mail newspaper. He quoted, "After a lifetime of driving, repairing, and studying automobiles, I have come to an unavoidable conclusion. We are the weakest link in a car. As car components go, human beings are deeply substandard. We have imperfect perception, and we are ruled by emotion, and we vary wildly in quality as well."
All right. So with that, everybody, we're going to go to lunch. In fact, Sinclair, go ahead and take over, and we'll be back after lunch to continue the panel. So save your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel, and that was very enlightening. We're going to break for lunch. I thought it was very interesting to talk about sensors and technology, and we've had all kinds of this. Anybody that's been to the men's washroom, 3 out of the 4 taps have sensors on them, and they don't work. So we do have to have a fix for all this new technology we have. I would encourage you to take a half-hour lunch break. At 12:30, Larry Skokin, the Chancellor for the North Dakota University System, is going to address us. So let's grab our lunch, come back in, and we'll keep moving.